started, you guys will be like, oh, they got done. And then you guys can cheer. It'll be, are you guys good in the back? Beautiful. All right. Cool. So listen, there are a lot of ways that you can like say that you're a Christian. There's a lot of different terms, a lot of different ways. Like if you were going to announce to the world, or you're going to tell people, or like if you're on Instagram, or you're trying to say like, I am a Christian, there's just a lot of different ways that you can say it. Like, there is obviously the word Christian, but then there's other words and other phrases that people use also. Like some people say that like I'm a disciple of Jesus. And some people say like I'm a follower of Jesus. Other people are like, oh, well, I'm saved. Or some people say, I'm a believer, right? Like we've all heard these terms. Some people, they're really kind of married to their denomination. So they'll be like, well, I'm Catholic, or I'm Mormon, or I'm Orthodox, because they don't want you to think. They're like, okay, well, I'm a Christian, but I'm not like those guys, or I am like these guys. Like that's just the way that it is. And that's just, look, we're we're the biggest religion on earth. We've been at this for 2,000 years. It makes sense that there's a lot of different ways of saying, that, hey, I am a Christian. But I think there's one that I just recently learned. I know I had read this at some point, and I just hadn't kind of overlooked it, and I missed it, and it was pointed out to me by somebody else writing a book, and I discovered it. I think, man, it is kind of maybe the most off-the-wall way of explaining or saying that you're a Christian that, you see anywhere in the Bible, and it comes from the Apostle Peter. And it comes from the Apostle Peter when he is preaching to Cornelius, the Roman centurion, and his family. So the 10-second version is, for the first 10 years of the church, there are only Jewish people or Jewish tangentially related people in the church. And finally, with Cornelius, with his family, you have the first Romans, the first full-blooded, full-bore Gentiles in the church, right? So Peter is preaching to Cornelius and to his household, and this is what we read in the book of Acts, chapter 10, verse 41. Peter says this. He says, we were those who ate and drank with Jesus after he rose from the dead. We were those who ate and drank with Jesus after he rose from the dead. That was the way that Peter described his Christianity, his faith, his relationship to Jesus. He is one, the church, they were the ones who ate and drank with Jesus after the resurrection, which sounds really dumb, if I'm being honest. Like at first, it sounds like a really stupid way of describing your faith in Jesus. It seems almost like a demeaning way, right? I mean, if you're an apostle, right? If you're Peter, you have left everything to follow Jesus. You left your family, you left your home, you left your business, you left your job, you left the way that you grew up, you left everything to follow Jesus. To boil down what sacrifice you made to we ate with Jesus, well, that doesn't seem to tell the story. Or, they did ministry. Like they did miraculous stuff. And, for 3 years, they traveled the known world doing all sorts of things. To boil that down to we drank with Jesus, it doesn't seem totally right. And when you expand it past the apostles, which this passage is absolutely referring to people that are not just apostles for, reasons we'll get to in like 2 minutes from now. If we go beyond just the apostles, we have to understand whether you're an apostle or whether you're just somebody who happens to follow Jesus at some point in time and believes in him and listens to his sermons and all that, you are constantly in danger. Remember, Jesus gets killed. And yeah, okay, Jesus sacrifices himself, and Jesus, there's the atonement and all the stuff and all of that. But from a practical perspective and not a spiritual perspective at all, Jesus just flat was murdered. He was just killed by people. So to follow Jesus, to believe in Jesus, to listen to Jesus, to hang out with Jesus, to do anything like that with Jesus means to put yourself in danger. And to boil all that down to just we ate with Jesus, we drank with Jesus, it doesn't seem exactly right. But I think when we think about it, I think that when we consider what exactly is going on with this phrase, I think we'll realize that it's actually maybe the most appropriate way of wording our faith that there is. Because the fact of the matter is this: food is never just food. Food always means something more. Consider this. Here's how significant food is. If you, men, guys, ladies, whatever, when you met your spouse, there's a really solid chance that your first date or one of your first dates was, hey, you want to go to dinner? Like, that's how we get to know each other, as we sit down, we eat food, we talk, we have all that. That, you know, your first date. I remember Stephanie and I's, you know, our first date that we had included eating at a terrible pizza place in Moberly. It was heinous. And I've tried to convince Stephanie it's good. She's not here, so I'll say it now. If she was here, I'd be like, no, it was amazing. But, you know, since she's not here and she won't listen to this, I can tell you it was bad. But, like, that's, you know, your first date, let's go to this terrible pizza place. But then, you know, Lord willing, when we're married 50 years, you know what we're going to do for our anniversary? We're going to have dinner. Like, that's food. You know, it's the beginning of a relationship. It's a celebration of you know, a long relationship, a lifetime of a relationship. We celebrate with food. We get to know each other with food. Think about our holidays, right? If I say Thanksgiving, you think of food. That's an easy one. If I say Christmas, you should think of food at least second or third, like Christmas dinner. If I say Halloween, literally, you know what Halloween is? We put on outfits, we walk around, and we get food from people. And at least at my house, it was even more than that. Like, we did, like my mom every year would make manwich. I don't know if you guys like manwich. But she would make this giant crock pot of manwich, and we would just eat that with potato chips. And I don't, like, nobody eats that out here, I don't feel like. In Indiana, everybody eats that all the time. I have not eaten manwich in 18 years. I should do that. But, like, I know, that look on your face, we should do that. Next church meal, somebody bring manwich, okay? But, like, we always had this giant pot of her. Right? Like, my mom would do that. It would, like, think of the 4th of July. Yeah, fine, fireworks, but you know what else you're doing? You're eating hamburgers and hot dogs. Everything we do revolves around food when it comes to holidays, because everything we do when it comes to family and friends revolves around holidays. I had this guy in my wedding, okay? One of my best friends in the world. We've been friends since about 2003. We became friends because he liked Long John Silver's, and so do I. That was enough for a lifelong friendship. Seriously. I got another guy at my wedding. I had 4 guys stay at my wedding. We're going to go through all of them. Another guy that went through my wedding, one of my best friends in the world. I love him with my whole heart. He's like my brother, right? I've met his whole family. I know none of their names. Okay? I have a hard time remembering his son's name half the time, right? Like, but you know what? I know he loves Burger King. Oh, man, does he love Burger King. The other 2 guys stayed at my wedding, okay? I've known this since high school. Most of our memories revolve around food. My favorite memory is the first time I ever made a cheeseburger. It was about 1 a.m. It was a Friday night. We decided, let's make a cheeseburger at 1 a.m. So we went to a 24-hour grocery store. We got ground beef. We went back home. We decided to do this. None of us know how to do it, by the way. So we fire up the grill with flashlights outside, you know, and this is what we do. We make a burger. I make this burger. It looks beautiful. And on the outside, it looks beautiful. On the inside, it is cold. I choked that burger down because I did not want to admit my mistake. And they just made fun of me endlessly. Guys, that's the power of, like, food, right? Like, food, it brings us together. Like, everybody's got to eat, right? So, like, food brings us together. It unites us. And, like, I mean, honestly, when I think of certain foods, I don't think of food. I think of people. If I think of, you know, the terrible Chinese food at the Columbia Food Court, or I think of, like, really rare steak, or I think of, like, homemade pizza, or I think of, like, chicken thighs on the grill covered in barbecue sauce, like, those are all people in my head. I'm not thinking of food. I'm literally thinking of the people I eat those things with. That's food. And I think Jesus was the same way. Like, I think that was the way Jesus operated as well. Peter says we are the ones who ate with Jesus after the resurrection. And there's 2 stories specifically. I firmly believe there's a lot more than just the 2 stories. But we have the 2 stories in the Bible that directly tell us that this happened. The first one is the day of the resurrection, on the very first Easter Sunday. Jesus appears to, there's these 2 disciples. They're not apostles. They're nobody that's famous or whatever, nobody we've really heard of. But they were in Jerusalem, and they were walking to a place called Emmaus. It was 7 miles, so they got a 7-mile walk. And they're traveling, and they meet this guy on the road, and it's Jesus. And, you know, it's one of those weird things that happens with the resurrection. They don't recognize Jesus somehow. Like, they don't see that it's him. But the 3 of them end up walking for these 7 miles. And as they're walking and they're talking, they start talking about, like, really, really important things. Like, this is one of the most significant passages of the scriptures to teach us how to read the Bible. Because Jesus ends up telling them about like, hey, like, you read the Old Testament through the lens of, what's going on through, the Messiah, that, we should take Jesus into consideration, that Jesus fulfills all these Old Testament prophecies, all this stuff. It's really deep, impactful, important stuff. And the whole time that they are walking and talking and Jesus is teaching them, and it's, again, really, really important, deep spiritual stuff, the disciples don't recognize Jesus at all. He's just some guy who's telling them this stuff. Well, they get to the end of their journey, and before they part ways, Jesus is like, hey, guys, let's get some food. Let's get some food. Let's have some dinner. We just walked 7 miles. We're all hungry. Let's all get some food. And so they all sit down and they have a meal. And it's at that moment when they sit down and start eating with Jesus that the gospel, according to Luke, tells us that that's when they recognize Jesus. As Jesus is teaching them all these deeply spiritual things, they don't recognize him at all. When they sit down and have dinner, when he says, let's get some food, that's when they recognize him. I mean, imagine, Jesus has risen from the dead. He is teaching deeply important things that will be written down forever. And in the middle of it, he's like, man, I could really go for a burger, guys. Because food's not just food. It's never just food. Food is about family, and it's about friendship. It's about connections. It's about time spent with each other. It's about getting to know each other. It's about reminiscing. It's about all the different things you do when you take the time to sit down and eat with someone. Later on, we learn from the gospel according to John. We learn that the apostle Peter has been struggling. I mean, just struggling. When Peter is called as an apostle, Jesus says, you're no longer a fisherman. Now you're going to fish for people, and you're going to be an apostle. You're going to do the stuff that I want you to do. You're going to be a huge part of the kingdom of God. You're going to be a huge part of the birth of the church, but you're not a fisherman anymore. And so when Peter goes back to fishing, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to say, well, that was Peter sort of giving up. Sort of giving up on being an apostle, sort of giving up on his faith to a degree, giving up on his friendship with Jesus to a degree. He was really just giving up. And you can understand why. If you guys remember at the Last Supper, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he's like, hey, you guys are going to betray me. And Peter says, no, absolutely not. Everybody else might betray you, but I never would. Even if everybody else does, I'm going to stick with you. And sure enough, Peter ends up betraying Jesus 3 times. And, it got to him. Of course it did. Of course it got to him. And it was a difficult thing. So Peter goes and he sort of gives up. And he's not really, acting as an apostle yet. And so what happens is Jesus actually goes, and one of the most beautiful stories we read in the New Testament, in John chapter 21, Jesus goes to Peter and sort of reinstates him. Like he denied him 3 times, so Jesus asks him 3 times, to, confess and say, that he loves him and he's going to follow him and he's going to do the things he's supposed to do. And it's just this beautiful moment of restoration and forgiveness, of healing, and it's wonderful. And Jesus only does that after they eat. Like that I need to forgive you and restore you and do all this stuff. That's important, but it is not important enough that we don't get food first. What happened is they're out fishing, and Jesus shows up on the shore, and he's like, hey, guys, come over here. And when they come to the shore, Jesus has made breakfast for them. I mean, imagine that. Like, you're out working and then Jesus makes you breakfast, bread and fish and a sunrise. I mean, they sit down and have a meal before they do anything else, before you get to any spiritual stuff, before you get to any forgiveness stuff, anything like that. They sit down and they just have breakfast. Food is not just food. And Jesus understands that. And that's why when you think about it, so many things about Jesus' ministry revolves around food. There's the feeding of the 5,000. There's the feeding of the 4,000. There's Jesus turning water into wine. There's Jesus saying, I am the bread of life. There's Jesus offering living water, where if you drink it, you're never thirsty again. Over and over and over, Jesus' ministry revolves around the concept of food, because food is not just food. Maybe most significantly, Jesus is criticized by the religious leaders over and over and over and over and over because of his relationship with sinful people. And the Bible doesn't tell us that Jesus, was talking to the sinful people, or Jesus was, getting to know them, or Jesus was not, preaching to them. It says Jesus was eating with them. It's not just that Jesus wanted to talk to sinful people. It's not that Jesus just wanted, to have sinful people around. Jesus was sitting down and saying, you guys are my friends. You guys are my family. I'm going to build a community with you. We will sit down and we will eat together. Food is not ever just food. And so, of course, it makes sense that Jesus gives us this thing. Like, we've got these two, we've been talking about this for the last few weeks. We've got these two symbols, these two religious rites that every Christian, no matter what kind of Christian you are, everybody in the church, in any kind of church, we do these two things. There's baptism and there's communion. Baptism, Jesus sort of adopts from John the Baptist. Communion, Jesus makes up on his own. And it shouldn't surprise us, given everything we just said, that communion, the Lord's Supper, the Eucharist, whatever you want to call it, that all of that revolves around food. Like we talked about last week, Jesus, on the night that he was betrayed, on the night that he was arrested, Jesus had this Passover meal with his closest friends. At some point during that meal, he ended up saying, you're taking some bread and saying, this is my body, taking some wine, he's saying, this is my blood, saying, I've given these things, this is broken, this is poured out as a new covenant, as a new agreement, a new promise between God and humanity. He says, this is what promises your forgiveness. This is what shows you a God who is love that is greater than any sin. And so it shouldn't surprise us if food is this important in the ministry of Jesus. If food is not just food, if Peter describes Christianity as eating with Jesus after the resurrection, drinking with Jesus after the resurrection, if that's how Christianity itself is described, it should not surprise us that communion is of the utmost importance in the early church. But to see just how important and what that means to us, we need to read a story. And this story is so inexplicable. Usually when I preach and I teach and I do this stuff, like, one of the things, just for the record, back in the day I was like, man, it's better to just tell a story than it is to read a story. Because, telling a story seems to be a lot more engaging. People seem to like that a lot more than reading. So that's what I do. If you guys haven't picked up on that yet, that's the thing that I do. This story is so bonkers. It's just nutty. We're going to have to read it because we need to see specifically what is said. This is Acts chapter 20. This is what we read, a story of the early church. On the first day of the week, we, meaning Luke and Paul and his group, on the first day of the week, we gathered with the local believers to share in the Lord's Supper. Paul was preaching to them, and since he was leaving the next day, he kept talking until midnight. The upstairs room where we met was lighted with many flickering lamps. As Paul spoke on and on, a young man named Eutychus, sitting on the windowsill, became very drowsy. Finally, he fell asleep and dropped 3 stories to his death below. Paul went down, bent over him, and took him into his arms. "Don't worry," he said. "He's alive." Then they all went back upstairs, shared in the Lord's Supper, and ate together. Paul continued talking to them until dawn, and then he left. Meanwhile, the young man was taken home alive and well, and everyone was greatly relieved. So let's start here. Eutychus is a hero. Eutychus is a pillar of the faith. I cannot imagine preaching for hours until midnight and anyone staying. I mean, I just want you guys to think about that. How long could I preach until y'all just gave up? Like, if it's 2 o'clock, are you still here? I mean, I'm just like, it's let's start there. Also, like, they didn't have a weekend, so Eutychus worked that day. You want to know why he's so tired? He worked all day, then he goes to church, and then church is lasting till midnight. They're in this room crammed together. Have y'all ever been in a room with lots of candles in it? It specifically says with lots of candles. That room was warm and toasty. I mean, it's amazing that Paul was awake as he was preaching. This guy he worked all day. He goes to church. He's sitting in this room. It's all crowded. It's crowded. That's why he's sitting on the windowsill. I mean, it's just packed with people. There's candles everywhere. Paul will not stop talking. He's like, well, I'm leaving in the morning. I got 3 more sermons. Nobody asked for that, Paul. Like, just come back later. Just save some source material for another time, man. But that's not. He keeps preaching. So he falls asleep. So let's just, like, Eutychus, I mean, like, we should all just, like, be in awe of his commitment to the church and Jesus. That guy's awesome. I love that dude. But this is a story about a guy dying and being brought back to life. So this is in the story. And I don't know if you guys notice, if you look at the story, that there is not a lot of attention given to that. It's like 4 words. He's like, oh, he's alive again. He's fine. They are so very casual about this guy being brought back to life. And speaking of casual, did you guys pick up on the fact that a guy died, he gets brought back to life, and everybody's like, well, let's eat. Like, they barely blink. They're like, well, look, there's a crock pot up there. It's got something in it. Mary brought that. It smells good. Like, he's fine. Let's go eat. I mean, like, it seems insane, but, like, the way the story reads, it just says, well, don't worry, he's fine. And then they went and had dinner. But I think it's really interesting to look at it says in the very first verse, it's so important that we see this. The very first verse says, on the first day of the week, we gathered to the local believers to share in the Lord's Supper. When we go to church, the question is, why are we going to church? Do we go to church for like a sermon? Do we go to church for music? Do we go to church to like, because we were told as kids we were supposed to go to church and so then we just stuck? Do we go to church because like we get some sort of like peace and comfort from it? Like, why is it that we go to church? Whatever we answer, just know this. The reason they went to church, the earliest Christians, the reason they went to church is to eat. You see, for them, like, we got a meal today. By the way, I did not plan this for a meal today. This was supposed to be a baptism sermon, and I didn't have anything yet, so I had to flip it. Just so you guys know, this is not just because we're eating today. It's all about food. But hey, it worked out, huh? Like, we got a meal once a month. Back then, they had a meal once a week. Like, that's just like the Lord's Supper was connected to just everybody coming and eating. Because they understood that food is not just food. Food is community. Food is friendship. Food is family. Food is getting together with people who may be nothing like you whatsoever, but you're both eating a pan of lasagna. And man, you're sitting there with that lasagna, you're like, this is so good. Everybody's got to eat. It is the great unifier. You may have nothing in common with anyone, but you have to eat, and so do they. The focal point of the ancient church was eating together. It was community. It was friendship. It was family. And it was remembering that Christ is the one who provides all of that for us. They ate and they took the Lord's Supper. And you know what? Not even a guy falling out of a 3rd-story window, dying and coming back to life can stop the fact that Marie showed up with a pie and we got to eat it. It was that important. When you think about it, of course it's that important. It's right there in the name. It's the Lord's Supper. It's Jesus' meal, right? In other words, what the Lord's Supper is, what communion is, as we consider what's going on, this is Christ's invitation to us. It is Jesus inviting us to participate in his body, in his church, in his kingdom, in his life. Fundamentally, that's what the Lord's Supper is. We sit down and we say, okay, Christ has invited me, and I'm going to say yes to that. Christ has invited me to participate in his kingdom, in his church, in his body, in his life, and I want to say yes. And so, of course, that's important. I mean, there's really nothing more important than that. That is the essence of all of Christianity. Communion. Food that is not just food. The Lord's Supper, Christ inviting us. It is the essence of all of Christianity. And that one little emblem. of course it meant that much to them. It should mean that much to us too. And if I may, that is really part of the story. That is half of the story. One more biblical thing, one more story from the Bible shows us the other half. Once we understand that food is not just food, and once we understand that this is the way Jesus teaches, and once we understand that there is symbolism and meaning and significance to every meal and everything we see, because food is family and friendship and community, once we see that, well, we can see something else about the Lord's Supper. One day, Jesus is in Jericho, and he meets a guy by the name of Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus is a wee little man. A wee little man is he. He's a tax collector. Everybody hates him. So he's short, and everybody hates him, and he's sinful, and he's bad, and we've all heard the story of Zacchaeus, right? So this is what we read about Zacchaeus. This is what we read specifically happens with Jesus having this conversation with Zacchaeus, how the whole Zacchaeus story happens. Jesus comes in. This is what we read in Luke chapter 19. Zacchaeus ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree beside the road, for Jesus was going to pass that way. When Jesus came by, he looked up at Zacchaeus and called him by name. Zacchaeus, he said, quick, come down. I must be a guest in your home today. I got to tell you the truth. I would never do that. And I was raised to believe that that's rude. You don't invite yourself to somebody's house. You know? You don't say, I got to be a guest in your home. Like if somebody invites you, cool, okay. But you don't invite yourself. But the wording here is so very important because we have to understand this is a story about food. I know it doesn't say food, but it's about food. In the ancient world, hospitality meant treating people like family, treating people like friends. You always gave them food. If somebody came to your home, you gave them food. Jesus goes to Zacchaeus, this sinful man who Jesus wants to talk to. There's going to be this conversion. It's this amazing thing. We all know the story of Zacchaeus, but it all starts with Jesus saying, hey, Zacchaeus, you need to invite me over. You need to bring me into your home. Hey, Zacchaeus, I need you to feed me. I'm going to have a meal in your home. That's how we're going to start this. Jesus invites himself over and says, let's have dinner, you're cooking. And it works. You know, we know the story of Zacchaeus. The bad guy turns into a good guy. And when we understand this is all connected, guys, like all this food talk, it's all connected. It's this narrative theme through Jesus' life, through his ministry, through his teaching, through everything he does. It's all connected. The Lord's Supper is Jesus inviting us to his table. But when we understand that that's all about forgiveness, it's all about God who is love, showing us that he is greater than our sin. When we recognize all of those things, then we understand there's more than just Christ's invitation to us that's going on. There's an invitation from us to Christ. When we take communion, we are not just accepting Jesus' offer. We are actually making an offer to Jesus as well. We are inviting him to eat in our home. We are saying we will be hospitable to you. You have invited us into your life. We're inviting you into ours. You have said that you want to be with us. We are saying we want to be with you. You've said that this table and this family and this friendship is here for us. We are telling you we want you to be part of our family. We want you to be our friend. Zacchaeus is changed because Zacchaeus invites Jesus to dinner. The same way that everyone is changed by Christ inviting them to dinner. Because food is not food. Food is it's family, it's community, it's friendship. And I think that at the end of the day, Peter describing Christians, Peter describing us, you and me, as those who eat and drink with Jesus. He's risen from the dead and we eat and drink with him. What we're saying is this: each and every day that we go about our lives, Christ is with us and we are with Christ. Christ is part of us. We are part of Christ. We are never apart. We are always united. We are always together. And every week we take communion. It's food. But food is never just food. And so when we take communion, we understand that Christ is inviting us to be a part of his kingdom, to help him in making the world a better place, to being part of his world and his life and his body. And as we say, okay, we will take communion, we say yes to that. What we are asking in return is, okay, Jesus, we are Zacchaeus. You're coming over for dinner tonight. We want you to be part of our lives. We want you to be part of our world. We want you to be with us at all times. In communion, we are reminded of this truth that is there absolutely every day, that Christ has said yes to our invitation, and we as Christians say yes to his each and every day. We all of us, you and me, every Christian, we are those people who have eaten and drank with Jesus. And this morning, we are in our 4th week of our series called Water and Blood. And as we talk about communion, as we talk about food, and we talk about who Jesus is and how we live our lives, we're given this lesson this morning, the twofold part of what Christianity is. In communion, Christ invites us to be welcome in his kingdom, while we invite him to be welcome in our lives. In communion, Christ invites us to be welcome in his kingdom, while we invite him to be welcome in our lives. This morning, the musician is going to come forward. We're going to sing a song. We offer an invitation each and every week to just take Christ up on this offer. Nothing is changed by anything. I mean, we're just simply embracing who God is and what Christ has done. And that's simply what we do. The Bible teaches that when we want to make this decision, we repent to be baptized. It sounds like two things. It's just one. In repentance, we change our minds. In baptism, it's a symbolic act in which we are united with Christ. We go down in the water. It's like our old selves being put to death. We come out of the water. It's like our new selves being born again. The Bible teaches us that when we do those things, that we are forgiven, that we are given God's Spirit, and that we are saying yes to this invitation, and we are inviting Christ into our lives as well. If you've never made the decision, we got a nice warm baptistry, all sorts of folks to do it. Let's talk. If you're already an immersed believer in Christ, looking for a perfect home, perfect church, this is not it. But we do so for perfect God. We want to connect, we want to call, we want to cultivate, which means we want to meet new people. We want to share the gospel. We want to grow up while we do it. We want to invite Christ into our lives. We want to accept Christ's invitation for us to be part of his life. Because food is not food. It's so much more than that. And we are friends and family with Christ through what he has done and through our faith in him. As we stand,